Hi everyone, Nosthany Stuffed Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it is time for a review of this new collaboration between Mark Kozelek, Ben Boye, and Jim White, 2. This is the second collaboration between legendary singer-songwriter Mark Kozelek of Red House Painters and Sun Kil Moon fame, Chicago multi-instrumentalist Ben Boye, and Dirty 3 drummer Jim White. The first album these three teamed up on dropped back in 2017. Personally, I thought it was one of the weaker projects Mark had dropped in that time period, but how could you blame me? This was the same year as Common as Light dropped, and that album is incredible. Occasionally, the instrumentals on this thing felt a little colorless, a little muddy, but I suppose that was somewhat made up for by the record's wild and improvisational approach. That does lead down some very strange passageways, as entertaining as it is to hear Mark Kozelek howling his brains out right after singing about cleaning up hairballs. The record was not completely devoid of highlights though, like the very personal and moving Astronomy, a refreshingly focused moment with backing keys and guitars that felt a little Velvet Underground inspired. On the vocals, we hear Mark sounding curious and hopeful as he is filing through all of these memories in a beautiful way. There's also the irresistibly groovy and theatrical Ashes, where Mark sounds like he's a one-man show, throwing up jazz hands and doing an interpretive dance to his diatribes on sex, aging, and food tasting better in its country of origin. It's a very long and unpredictable LP that will forever remain an oddball in Kozelek's discography for me, even if there are some creative parallels with other records that dropped around this same time. I should also say, for anyone this deep into the review who is unfamiliar with Mark's work, he is a songwriting veteran who just won't quit. A creative enigma whose one-of-a-kind style has evolved into a winding, rambling, non-sequiting series of experiences, travels, TV shows he likes, interactions, from sex to cats to David Cassidy to whatever he sees on the news. I'm convinced there is not a single thing that Mark could not or would not write a song about in his personal life. So regardless of the instrumentals and personnel on this record, I expected at least that much to hold true here. I am happy to say I think that this one is a bit more focused and a bit more consistent than the record it's a sequel to. After all, at this point, 78 minutes is a pretty tight Kozelek album. I think the mood of this one is a bit more consistent too. It's very contemplative, occasionally meditative, and even at some points feeling as if it's caught in a slightly depressive daze. In that sense, it does share some overlap with Mark's recent self-titled record, though obviously there's no pressure here to record songs quietly and on the fly in a series of hotel rooms, so Mark is able to stretch out and explore more organic and lush sound palettes, swatches of pianos and drums and vocal harmonies and guitar, all of which comes off very rustic, very natural, as if it's happening right there in front of you. You're in the room listening to this thing if you're on a quality pair of headphones. For one, I love the hypnotic and evenly played piano arpeggios, as well as gently picked guitars on the opening track, WALKIN in Auckland. Of course, on this record, the songs are really more dictated by Mark's wandering narratives as opposed to a tight melody, so expect that. Though it's something I find enjoyable if Mark is going on about something intriguing, funny, or even insightful. I think the instrumental fits Mark's story really well in that it seems like a soundtrack to grogginess, starting your day really slowly because you had a very late night. Narratively, Mark is going over the previous night's events in his head as if it's all happening in slow motion. As he describes himself in the moment, he barely even feels awake there. It's like he's just caught in this emotionally numb, tired stupor all the time. He's at the hotel, getting breakfast, planning to go back to his room, and then he has a very odd exchange with some front desk person who's yelling at him, "Hey, you're spilling water everywhere, you're spilling water!" Mark's confused. He doesn't know where the water's coming from. He's saying there's no water. There's misunderstanding, there's yelling, there's cussing. It seems like a very Curb Your Enthusiasm type of interaction. Not only that, but the instrumental switch up at this point in the song to display the tension of the moment reminds me of some early Modest Mouse with the guitars and the yelpy vocals. After this interaction though, Mark enters back back into this daze he was previously in. Displaying his life in a way where it is ever shifting, never settling, very compartmentalized, this type of commentary he had made at length on a couple of tracks on This Is My Dinner not too long ago. The song LaGuardia is similarly relaxed and weary, occasionally transitioning into these very tense passages of guitar loops and pianos and what sounds like tiny little rhythmic claps. The narrative on this one isn't as compelling, and I find the ascending piano chords that are quite fragmented to be a little stony. And the only interesting thing I found to be in this track were the celebrity musings in the second half, where Mark goes off on Michael Jackson, saying that on an earlier song where he was trashing him. Critics panned it, but now after leaving Neverland, which he describes having a physical reaction of disgust to, everyone seems to be on his side. And then there's this really weird monologue about Jeff Buckley saying that he reached out to Mark at one time, expressed being a fan, Mark describing himself as having not responded, thinking, why would he want validation or an interaction from me? He's a successful, sexy musician with celebrity lovers. Then making a mental leap to say, based off a conversation, maybe he was seeking some kind of help or guidance or something. Like, ultimately the song's message of everyone is insecure, everyone has insecurities is true, but I find this moment in the song to be oddly presumptuous and just difficult to digest. Trying to come to any conclusions about Jeff Buckley's personal character or emotional state based off of him simply trying to contact Mark Kozelek at this point just seems very unfair and weird. I mean, maybe he was just being cool and nice and friendly. Personally, I get more enjoyment out of the fluid and serene pianos on the Following the Artist, which, given the titles track, doesn't exactly play out in the way that you expect it to, as Mark lyrically is going into deep detail about every procedural move executed by a sandwich maker, basically being wowed by this person's sandwich making ability and calling him an artist, which is a pretty cool moment in the track, an interesting passage. But then we go into an exchange with a taxi driver talking about how people are engrossed in their smartphones. The track detours and detours and detours from there, and it's not exactly riveting or enchanting for the full 11 minutes, though it does top things off with a very beautiful and passionate ending. I think the lowest point on the record, though, that just would not grow on me no matter how many times I listened to it, was Charred Enchilada. Personally, I don't really get that much out of Mark going into great detail about enchiladas and a charred enchilada and how weird a charred enchilada is, and I guess just his appreciation for that, and then transitioning into a diatribe about how bassoons and bassoon players are not cool, though I do find it very funny that this passage finishes off with an instrumental flourish that is led by, of course, a bassoon. Mark, you are very funny. In the final leg of the record comes one of my favorites here, My Brother Loves Seagulls, which instrumentally and narratively resembles a track from Sun Kil Moon's Benji. I love the beautiful and calming finger-picked nylon guitar notes on this one. I can just sink into them. Meanwhile, Mark is going on about his connection to his brother, or lack thereof, and the song essentially reaches a progression where he is reaching out to him, calling him, just trying to get back in touch, because work and life and music and everything is kind of distracting and getting in the way, and the song just expresses that need to make that, again, connection once more. Nice to hear that despite this distance, because of things going on around them, there is still that love and support there. Meanwhile, on Where's Gilroy, this track is a slow, plucky acoustic cut that builds up to a diatribe on gun violence, where after filing through some everyday occurrences, Mark gets hit with news of that Garlic Festival shooting in Gilroy last year, and there's this sense of confusion and even a feeling of being upset from him and maybe even some other people mentioned in the song when people are talking about, well, where is even this place? These things are happening in places we don't even know or understand or can find on a map, have a connection to. So that shooting and the news of it interrupts life in a way, but everything goes on as normal immediately after, which in a way I think is a commentary. Regular life continues. While I do think that bringing up things like Columbine to say this is nothing new is kind of talking past the issue because it doesn't acknowledge the fact that there has been an uptick in these sorts of events. Still, I do think it is essential to frame that America does have a very long and violent history that this sort of plays into the larger context of. The song August Night is a somewhat odd closer for the record. It wouldn't be a Mark Kozelek album if there wasn't a super meta moment And that is essentially this. I mean, it kind of reaches an apex at a point where Mark is commenting on his own vocal harmonies mid-song, and even going on about the length of the record as we near the finish of the track, which features a short exchange with a door-to-door Mormon evangelizing, giving him a picture of Jesus. Mark is essentially telling him he's not interested in a very friendly way, and we don't get deep into this interaction before the track just cuts off, just ends very abruptly, very hard end. Certainly one of the more unique finishers to a Mark Kozelek work, I'll say that, but I'm not sure if I feel all that drawn to return to it, as I felt it didn't really have one of the stronger progressions of any of the tracks here, and essentially it did come off a little anticlimactic. So I will say I do think this record is better than the first time, a few years ago, these three crossed paths, but I only ended up loving about half the record, and I think that boils down to a handful of issues. There are so many tracks on this thing that I don't find to be all that engaging, all that tuneful, really all that memorable, as Mark is taking me down themes and ideas and narratives that he's kind of explored before in ways that I guess had more impact in the past. Mark's work recently, with it being as unique as it is, has been compared to a lot of things that are outside of the musical realm, whether that be a book or a journal or a podcast or a movie. But this time around, his narratives to me felt like I was playing some kind of open world game where I've completed all the objectives, and now I'm just cycling around the same familiar ideas again and again and again and again. And I'm not so much listening to his records at this point to hear a song or hear him, I guess, expand my mind with anything. I'm just hearing them to, I guess, like get a bit of an update on what's going on with him, almost as if I was holding a phone call with the guy, which I guess could make for a more compelling album if the whole thing felt a bit brighter, tighter, more melodic, more focused, more clever. I do commend him for doing what he does in the style that he does it for as long as he's been doing it. But at this point, how can I not feel at least a little bit like he's kind of running this into the ground? Even if a few good tracks come out of it, even if nobody else is daring enough to do it. Feeling a strong 5 to a light 6 on this one? Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up, or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Mark Kozelek, Ben Boye, Jim White, forever.